Hello there, and welcome to another episode of what we are calling Sitting with God on the Brink of Eternity. This episode has a sobering title. In fact, the title is A Sobering Reality. I got the idea of that from a good friend, Atama Edgy. Atama has a podcast series similar to this, except that he interviews authors. And so I've been on his program a few times, both as an author and then to ask questions and dialogue some with another author that he is interviewing. But anyway, I sent him an email about my condition and sort of where things were. And he wrote back, and one of the statements he made was this: what you share about getting your house in order is very sobering. And so I want to talk about getting my house in order and what that did mean as I said it. One of the first nights that I was in the hospital, thinking that I was likely going to die, I decided to pull the family in. That would be my wife, my son, his wife, our daughter by marriage, and our three grandsons. The grandsons at that time were 24, I think 20 or 21, and 17. And so I felt like they needed to be a part of a discussion about end-of-life matters, because I thought my life was very possibly going to end. And so as I talked with them, I shared that I thought I could die and they needed to be prepared for that. But I also talked about not having my house in order. And I meant by that I had file cabinets full of old documents that were unneeded, and they would have to clear all of that out if I died. I talked about all the electronic equipment I had in a big closet full of shelves, full of junk that I was no longer using. I had my entire desk full of electronic equipment as well. And so I felt like you got to get rid of all this, but I hate to leave it with you. And so there were things like that I had on my mind that I wanted to share with them. And then I do all of my banking online, and I'm the computer guy and the financial guy in our house. And so I felt like Theresa would need some immediate help with some of the banking issues if I were to die. And so those were the things that I had on my mind. I have had documents for years, will, all kinds of instructions about what to do if I died. I've had all that online, but I didn't have some of the other things that were on my heart, and I hated to leave my family with that. A good friend of mine said after her husband died that he was a clutter bug, and I didn't want to be leaving that impression on my family with a bunch of unfinished business when I died. And so I asked Bryce, who is my oldest grandson. He has a job in the financial area. His graduate degree is in, or his degree is in business, but he's a financial guy in his job. So I said, listen, here are some things you need to know. And Joy, my daughter by marriage, is also sort of the financial one in their family. And so I asked Joy and Bryce to deal with this, and I started trying to give them information and passwords. And I got out my phone and started looking at my phone and trying to type passwords in to make sure I had them correct. And my whole operating system looked like someone had changed it. An alien had invaded my phone and changed everything about it. I couldn't get anything right. It was a very frustrating night, but it absolutely was a very sobering night. While we were doing all of this, some of the family members were crying. Others were trying the best they could to stay engaged with me and figure out what I was telling them that they would need to do in the event of my death. And so it was quite some night. But at the end of it, I explained to my family that I had tried as best I could to teach them how to live well, but I also felt the obligation to teach them how to die well, because all of us are going to do that. And so it was a very sobering night. I don't think any of us will forget that night. But for me, while it was sobering, it wasn't a morbid topic. By the way, after I did survive and get out of the hospital, I did take care of some of those things. I took 6 boxes of old documents and got them shredded, kept only the things that would be needed. And then I had my good buddy Rich Evans, who's my computer guru in Boston, to fly in and help me for several days get rid of my old laptops and tablets and phones and get it all totally erased, not just say it's deleted, but get it totally erased. And some of the leftovers we recycled, some of it we threw away, some of it we repurposed and gave to people that were able to use it. But at any rate, I did do a lot more to get my house in order. But I think the main thing that I have on my mind is just helping people to think through what to do when a family member dies or when they're getting ready to die, possibly, because we all are going to go that way. One of the funniest instances in my life along these lines is that I had this very good friend in Phoenix, Jerry Jones. And I was with Jerry and his wife one day, and we were driving down to an orphanage in the edge of Mexico from Phoenix and doing a day there to serve them. But at any rate, driving back, Jerry said, now, talking about the end of life and everything, we're all getting older fast. He said, you and your wife have discussed how to handle things when one of you croaks, right? And so I started laughing. I had never heard it put quite like that. And I went home and told Theresa what Jerry had said about croaking. And she just cackled. She thought that was hilarious to call it that. But at any rate, from then on, she would shop far and wide to find a card that would have like a frog on the front. And then you opened it up and it said something to the effect of, thank God you haven't croaked yet. And so she gave those cards to Jerry on his birthday until he did croak. I was able to talk with him just before he died. He knew he was about to die. And Karen told me he wasn't lucid that often, but when he got lucid, she would call. He did, and she did, and we had a wonderful conversation. I knew it would be our last. And the very next day, he did die. In his words, he croaked. And I'll assure you that Jerry Jones had his house in order. And so that was the purpose of the night, to help get my house in order in case I did die. And by God's grace, I did not. But it was a very sober night, not morbid, but sober, when I called the family together. And so I thought for this session, I would just have my wife, my son, my daughter by marriage, who were there with us that night. I want them just to take some time to share about that night and what they learned from it, either practically or spiritually or both, but things that maybe they could pass on to you to help you be prepared when that time comes in your family the next time it does. And of course it will. And so I'm going to ask Joy to begin when we get rearranged here for a moment, and then Bryan, and I'll let my wife finish up. People have asked me, how did Theresa handle that, knowing that you were possibly about to die? And I said, as I expected, she handled it very spiritually and very maturely. There was no freaking out at all. It's something that we talk about and that we anticipate is going to happen. But I'll let her speak for herself. I have no idea what any of the three will say, but I thought it would be something that would probably be very helpful to you. Okay, as I said, I would have my family with me on this second segment of the episode. And so I have my wife, I have my son Bryan, I have my daughter by marriage Joy, and they will be sharing, each of them, whatever God put on their heart to share. But my thought was, we had a tough night at the hospital to begin, talked about some very serious things, not morbid things, but serious things. And so I wanted them just to share from their perspective what that night was for them and what the hospital stay was for them, whatever they want to share. I have no idea what they're going to share. That's up to them. But I wanted them to share things that might be helpful to others to get past their fear of talking about reality, especially the reality of death, losing loved ones, and eventually dying yourself. So I've asked Joy to go first, and then Bryan, and we'll end up with Theresa. So the show's yours, Joy.
All right. Well, yes, my name is Joy, and I just want to thank you just for this time that I could share about just a spiritual lesson that I learned from just this experience with dad being very sick at the hospital. And even as a nurse, the very first time I saw him, I knew that he was not well. And even just a sobering reality that he could probably die. It was very clear that that was a possibility to me. But and as a daughter, also just seeing that he was so weak was it really affected me. But I know that I just had to really just care for him. You know, when you love someone so much, you will do anything for them. And so as Dad shared, there was this one time where God gave him the strength to be able to even speak to us with his words. And it was a time where he gathered all of us together, our family, my three sons, Bryan and Mom, and we were gathered around his hospital bed. And he shared some very serious things. A lot of it was just the reality that, you know, that he could not make it, that he could die. And I could truly feel just the emotion as, you know, as he started to speak. And he talked about a lot of different things, from different details of what needed to be taken care of, and even passwords to things, and finances, to what the memorial services would be like. But he also shared about the fun times we had as a family and all the good memories. And but one thing he said that resonated with me, and I'll never forget it, and truly grateful for this time, is that he said at the end, almost his very last words as he was ending our talk, he said, "Do good with God. Do good with God." And, you know, we don't know when our time is. We never know when our last day will be. But when you're at that moment where you think it could be your last, you think, am I good with God? Will I be able to spend eternity with him? And so what does that mean for me? But for others, for me, it meant my relationship with God, my devotion to God, my obedience, my trust, my faith, and ultimately my surrender to his will, whatever his will is. As much as I wanted my children to hear those words, do good with God, honestly, it was what I needed to hear. It's everything to me. And I knew that that was the most important thing to him, is that that he could impart that to us, that at the end of everything, that we would be faithful to God, because that's all that matters, you know. And I think we don't know what tomorrow will bring, and we don't know when our last days will be, but we can think about um, that we could be good with God, because he's so faithful to us. And as days went by, as I sat there, I did know that for sure, you know, the reality of death could be, but I did believe in my heart that he would live to tell this story. I wrote it. There was a banner there that many people had signed, and I remember writing in it that you're going to live to tell this story. And here we are today, just being able to tell this story that God, God's will be done. And so I was able to really witness God working. Even it was just such a difficult time, this whole experience for sure. But one thing I know for sure is God took us to the almost to the brink of eternity, like as far as He could take us, just to show us that He loves us, because He wanted us to cling to the faith that we had, that, His will be done. And so I was very grateful for that talk. So grateful that my children got to hear it, but so grateful that we could talk about death and dying. And um, I'm so grateful that we could share this story that, even if it turned out a different way, whether, he didn't make it, I wouldn't trade anything for what we experienced, because God taught us a very important lesson to hold on to Him. When crisis hits, you just cling to Him and you stay calm during the storm, because others may need you to be calm, and to just have faith. This whole experience helped me dig deep in my faith for sure. And I will be forever grateful for not only this experience, but the talk that we had. It was unforgettable, and I will always hold it dear to my heart. God is a good God. And at the end of it all, when we think maybe it could be our last, we could think and know that, are we good with God? As Dad said, and it was basically his last words was, do good with God. So thank you
Wow.
for letting me share.
All that. I have an amazing wife.
Okay.
So it was a really strange time. I think all of us in our own minds, we have this picture, this scene of what it's going to be like on our deathbed, and then also our family's deathbed if we have parents or older family members. And it was such a surreal experience being in the hospital. I remember the night Joy was talking about, and in my relationship with my dad, there were some things that I needed to talk about, I think, to kind of clear the air, if you will. And so I remember telling everyone, okay, everyone out of the room, I need to talk to Dad. And Mom tried to stay in the room, but I said, no, you have to leave too. But it was great. We got to have a final talk. And I remember even telling him, are you really gonna die? I mean, this is just such a weird experience. And we got to, have a great talk, and I felt that if it was his time, that, I had said the things I needed to say and get things off my heart. And thankfully he made it. And that gave us kind of a second chance, I think, in our relationship. So I want to mention two things about relationships as it pertains to family members and friends. And first of all, never give up on relationships, especially if it's with your family. I don't know if you all are like this, but a lot of times family members, they're the ones that can really push our buttons, unlike anyone else probably in our lives. And we can be real sensitive, to things with our family. That's just the way it is, right? We have a lot of history. But it's so important to work through difficulties, to work through any sort of attitudes you have or any sort of insecurities. These challenging emotions, it can be a hard thing to work through, and it can be awkward, but this hard work is really worth it. And then secondly, never leave things unsaid in your family relationships. None of us knows, the hour or the day we're going to die, how we're going to die, or for our family members as well. Don't know how they're going to pass. And it's so important to make sure that you're good with one another, that there wouldn't be any sort of bad feelings or regrets if your loved one passed and you had something on your heart that you needed to talk about. And that can be a tricky thing. There's times that, we do need to talk about things with a family member maybe, and there's other things that you're just going to be different, and that's just the way it is. But in your heart if there's something you really need to get off your chest, and it's really worth it to have that sort of talk with one another and that kind of relationship with one another. And the most important thing, I think, is to let your family members know that you accept them and that you love them unconditionally. And that's the most important thing.
Okay, I'd like to share. And I have been in love with Gordon for about 62 years, and we've been married for 58 of those years. And I'm so grateful that I get this opportunity that Gordon asked me to share about what I learned and what I'd like other people to learn from our experience with his being treated with chemo, and also, as mentioned, the night that we faced life or death. Really, we were at the pivotal point. First of all, just like to say that being prepared for your life to end quickly. Gordon and I and the family had just celebrated Easter and had eaten together here, and everybody went home. And quickly, he had a reaction. And like you said in an earlier podcast, he just lost all of his food and became deathly sick, where he couldn't eat or drink for many days. And so often we think we have time in our lives to get things right, or that we're going to be okay. And you might look at me because I'm 79 and he's 80. Well, yeah, you ought to consider that. But really, when you're young, it's the same thing. You never know how long or short your life will be. But just learning, I thought of even that night, this over here in James 4:13 that says, sometimes you make plans for tomorrow, but your life is really like a vapor. It appears for a little while and then vanishes away. And so, you really have to say, if it's God's will, I'll do something. And Gordon and I have always been very open about the reality of death, that one of us is, and we talk about it. A lot of families don't talk about it. And then at the end, they're just devastated. But Gordon and I have talked all through the years about our death, and we're ready for death. We have a trust already made out. We have it legal. We have talked it over with the children, so it's not going to be surprises. And mostly with he and I talking about it and being okay with it. And it has given me a lot of security in knowing that. So that scripture there in James 4 is something that woke me up. And then also to be persistent in prayer. Some people looked at me during that time and they kept saying, how do you feel? How do you feel? And I just would explain, I'm just praying continually. I'm praying continually and persistently. So be persistent in prayer. And when I prayed always, God, I want your will to be done. I'm surrendered with it. If you take his life now, or if you let him live, I'm okay with it. But I remembered in Philippians 4, it says, pray so you won't be anxious. Be persistent in prayer, like it talks about in one of my favorite scriptures in 1 Thessalonians 5:16 through 18, that says, pray continually and be grateful in all circumstances. But anyway, back to the praying persistently. I remembered in Philippians 4 where it says, pray, be grateful, be thankful, but it says petition God. So I said, okay, God, you said I can petition you. I'm going to be like the persistent widow. And I was. I said, God, I'm settled out, like I said, with your will. But I can think of a lot more purposes for his life. And so if you can let that happen, please, please let him live longer to accomplish those purposes. And even making this podcast is a result of God letting him live because he has more of a purpose. And even with other people, I can think he has more of a purpose. And then I thought of the last part is pursuing your purpose. Keep pursuing your purpose. Be pursuing your purpose. And that's what Gordon and I both have always wanted to do is accomplish the purpose God has for us. Because, he has a purpose for everyone's life while they're still living. And one of our main one is for as many people as possible to know God's love like we do. And then for them to feel God's love through us. And then for them to accomplish their purpose. And we did pursue our purpose while we were in the hospital. We shared with people, we shared with doctors, we shared with nurses, as Gordon mentioned in one of his podcasts. And our greatest purpose is to have a personal relationship with God and to help other people have it, and then to help our family to have it. And I think I'm so thankful to God that we have this day, that we can thank him that he's not finished with us yet. Like is said in Acts 13:36 that I quote to Gordon. It says when David had accomplished his purpose on earth, he fell asleep. And so I know that's what we'll do. That after we accomplish our purpose for God, we just fall asleep and wake up with God. So I have that wholehearted purpose of helping Gordon go to heaven. And that's his purpose for me, is to have a personal relationship with God and to help me go to heaven. Because I want us both to be there. I want my whole family to be there. And I want as many people as possible to be in heaven.
Okay, well, thank you guys. You did a great job. And there'll be people that watch this that will get something from what each of you said. And there will be some lives that will be changed because of what you said that will help them. So I had total confidence just to give you a general guideline and go where your heart led you to go. And I think all three of you did a great job and are a large part of how I made it through, because I felt your concern, I felt your love, I knew you were praying a lot. And so just seeing you, and as bad off as I was, it just made all the difference. I just have a family that loves me, and I feel that love, and it made all the difference to me. So I wanted you to share because I knew that each of you would have a different thing that you would share, but I'm confident, 100%, there will be people that watch this, and what each of you have shared will resonate with different people, and it will make a real difference in their life. So I didn't want to have this series without you guys being here and doing what you did. So anyway, I feel great about it, and I'm so glad that you shared it. Thank you for doing it. I know it's not easy. It wasn't easy that night, but you handled it well that night and all the other times because you're spiritual people. And that's what I have confidence in. Spiritual people will act spiritually. So when people ask, how did your son handle it? How did your wife handle it? How did Joy handle it? The answer is spiritually and maturely.
For the most part, pretty much.
Pretty much. But like I expected and appreciate deeply. So anyway, that wraps up this particular episode. And see you for the next one.